Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah and welcome to Finding Me on the ITV networks today. I am really honored, a very special guest, a wonderful colleague, and I think it's perhaps a blessing that after such a long time I have managed to secure and lock down Roland Henwood, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. And we're going to talk about something very interesting, something that I know that is at the heart of all South Africans who are watching the show, and that is South African politics. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, Roland, for making this time.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Like I said, it's almost 7 years. I've finally managed to lock you
I
down.
can't believe it, but yes.
So, you're a specialist in South African politics, in strategic studies, you do foreign policy as well, diplomacy. All of these things, I think, come together at some point in time and you start seeing a bigger picture because you're not just in a particular niche. You're looking at different things. And South Africa is in a very difficult time, a trying time. It's as if Charles Dickens said, we're in the best of times, we're in the worst of times. We're at a crossroads. I mean, we speak to our students all the time. You can see they've lost hope. There's no hope in the younger generation. For the older ones who are here, the question is, do we stay, do we go? We know a lot of people are leaving the country, and that includes black professionals as well. If you're standing at this particular crossroads, what do you see in terms of South Africa?
You touch on a very important issue, and I think that is where maybe we can start unpacking this, and that's the issue that the myths that are being created and perpetuating in a way in how we engage in South Africa. And one of the key myths is that white people are leaving South Africa, and that's nonsense. People are leaving South Africa. It's interesting, I did just an informal ask in class one morning, third-year students, and I was shocked. The majority of students who said they want to leave as soon as they can were black students. And that, I think, is one of the myths that we have. People are unhappy, people have lost hope, and people are leaving. And we can't afford that, because the people who are leaving are those that we actually need to stay in South Africa.
They're the people we've invested in, isn't it?
Invested in and shared our collective knowledge and experience with, in the ideal that something good is going to come of this and something better is going to come of this. And I think that's the problem. We've lost hope of that better South Africa. We've become very divided, factional, and very resentful of everything and each other. And that's dangerous territory. I've never experienced the sense of resentfulness and anger in South Africa that I experience at this time. And we should be worried about that. We should not say it's a this or a that. That's our problem.
Yes.
We label people and we put them in categories. That's not the issue.
So there's too much of black and white politics, in other words, without recognizing that there are so many contexts.
Well, black and white in the
yes.
sense of not only race, but in the sense of human trying to be clinical about things. And that's nonsense. That's not who we are, and that's not what's happening around us. We have to be much more circumspect, and I think we have to be much more inviting of each other. Not they must do this and then I will reciprocate. I think that's part of our problem. Everyone is waiting on someone else to do something. We have to be much more inviting of each other.
And much of what you say, I think, played out in the SONA, in the State of the Nation address. Yes. If you look at it, what are your thoughts on that?
Two things. A president that one can listen to and listen to as the president of South Africa. But I am disappointed in that SONA was full of promises and some details of things that will happen, but very short on the delivery side, very short on the details. And I don't expect SONA to be this detailed policy implementation process, but it was too vague and it was too much of the same. The question I have, and it's not just of SONA, but the question I'm asking more and more is, the leadership of the ANC, the president, he must act as the president of all South Africans. And he's not convincing in that role. Although he has by far the largest level of support in South Africa of all political leaders, his level of legitimacy is more than we've had in a very long time in South Africa. But somehow, and I don't know if it's his advisors, the people who's writing his speeches, or the conflict in the ANC, but he has to be convincing and show himself as the president of all South Africans. And that's what SONA is about. It was too much policy, this will happen, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. At the same time, SONA started off saying we are in serious trouble. We have no money. We have to do this. We are fighting against this. And then moving away from that very swiftly into this kind of, we've been there before and nothing happened. And I think that is why it's not convincing.
So, I mean, from the students that I've spoken to, also a lot of them were upset about the fact that, you know, the president is talking about introducing modern technology into the schools when they know that kids don't even have proper schools yet. There's still more than 3,000 schools that don't even have flushing toilets, right? There's still the pit latrines, where there is the teachers are not present in the class, or where there even isn't proper infrastructure in terms of the schools. And as you say, you don't know if it's the advisors, the people who write the speech or whatever. It seems that there is a disconnect between the reality and what it is that they feel they need to say. But what they feel that they need to say is also a disjuncture. It's a split, because they don't realize who the audience is. Because you need to say those things if you're speaking to a developed nation, or you're speaking to people who already have a high standard of living and showing how we're going to improve. But basics, we haven't gotten the basics right yet.
There's a shocking statistic that the educationists are talking about. And that is, I think the number is 78% of grade 4 people are functionally illiterate. They cannot read and understand what they read. Not even at that level, but they're sitting in school. So it's nice to have the focus on technology and coding. I mean, that's where a modern nation needs to go.
Yes.
The problem is we have not addressed the basic problems of our education challenges. This is 25, 26 years on since 94. Now, of course, dealing with the legacies that South Africa face is a long-term project. I don't see that long-term mindset in planning and executing education. So we have lost 25 years, another 25 years, before we come to grips with the problem. So again, what is said is great, but it doesn't sit well in the context where we are. So what are our real priorities? Who are we engaging as a government, as a people? And yes, a lot of emphasis on young people and what happens with young people. Keep in mind, the unemployment rate for people 18 to 24 is 58%.
That's very high.
In rural areas, it's above 70%. There's no hope. Economists are saying that 30% of young people now, not in future, will never in their life have formal employment. So what are we saying as South Africans to ourselves, as a government, and to the young people in this country? If that is the projections, and that's the issue, these are not secrets, we know them. We don't see any planning, we don't see any serious engagement to deal with these issues. And that is what is discomforting, and that is what is creating a sense of insecurity.
So, but then if we know these things, statisticians are talking about it, educators or analysts like yourself are talking about it, how come the people who actually make the policy or write the speeches or do the presentations, they don't know?
Some years ago, I did a presentation to Portfolio Committee, not in Parliament. It was a different setting. And the chair of the committee said to me, "These things, where do you get it?" I said, "But it's research, it's available." She said to me, "Why are we not aware of this? Why do officials who come to us never inform us of these things?" So there is a serious de-link between the bureaucracy, Parliament, and probably then the executive. My worry is there's one example of it being picked up. I don't know what happened since then. I was contacted by the National Youth Commission saying, "We hear you have this information. Can you share it with us?" I did. Never heard again.
And nothing happens.
That's part of the problem. And I think the other challenge is some people, and I include myself in that some people, we don't have the access to necessarily follow up on this. Also, you get busy with you know what it's like working here. You get so tied down that you don't follow up on it. It kind of becomes something that you've done. But that's disconcerting. There is a de-link in our system. And instead of focusing on these issues, I think our priorities are wrong. And then we fall back on the easy option of the us-them engagement in South Africa.
Yeah.
That's not going to solve our problem. I'm not saying forget what happened here. We can't. What I'm saying is, Are we working for our future, or are we working to fight about our past? Sorry, but at this stage, my sense is that we are so busy with our past that we don't think about our future.
So we have to go into a break just now, but very quickly, I think it's not that we're so busy with the past. I think the past is used as a scapegoat to obscure from the failings of the present, and
That's
from
part of
taking accountability, isn't it?
Definitely, that's part of it. It's an easy way out, and it's emotionally appealing.
Yes.
But we have to get beyond that. I think another issue linked to this is, and I don't want to insult anyone, but I have a sense that politically and bureaucratically, the mindset in South Africa, if we talked about something, it's done. Not so. We have to start doing.
Action, yes, the
We
action.
have to start doing. And that is sorely missing in everything we do.
Well, but then that comes in again into the ethics of work, I think so. But we'll talk about that when we come back from the break. We'll see you after the break. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me on the ITV Networks with my very special guest, and it's Roland Henwood from the Department of Political Sciences. Now, Roland, before we went on to the break, you're speaking about, this, that saying something doesn't mean it's automatically done. So we love to talk, but there's very little action. And that again comes to the ethics of work and a mindset of work. And we find that, if you're comparing South African society, many people say to like Japanese society or even to Indian society where the workers are really hard workers, you don't have that same kind of ethics translating into the workplace. Now, does that affect basically the kind of development that we're pushing towards and also perceptions about South Africa?
Yes, it does. I think it, and there are many negative issues. Firstly, we are rewarding non-performance. It seems to be more important who you know than what you know. So we are also rewarding a different network of engagement to one that is actually going to deliver on what we need in South Africa. And these are harsh words I'm using. I'm trying to put it very nicely. We all know where it's going. But the issue is we are not using our resources, and we have limited resources. If you look at the demands, the expectations, and the realities of South Africa, we have limited resources in the short to medium term. We have to use them very skillfully, and we are not using them optimally. And that is contributing to the sense of negativity and defeat. And I think that's the issue. We are looking at a people who are acting in terms of a sense of defeat.
So you've resigned yourself to defeat?
Yeah, and we can't afford that. And then you start unpacking and focusing on the negatives, rewarding people who are not making a contribution because of who they know, who they are. And I think that the difference now in South Africa is the scale of the problem. Of course, it happens in all societies. It's not unique to us. But the scale of the problem in South Africa, I mean, this is industrial scale deception, looting, whatever you want to call it. We are defeating ourselves. And we are creating that and feeding a sense of hopelessness. And it's an ethical issue also. We really have to come back to the basics. And we have to come to our senses as a people and start acting, not just talking and thinking.
So, again, a lot of the students complain that the president spoke about accountability, transparency, etc., but not a single person has been charged yet from the Zondo Commission and from the investigations done as yet. Comes to what you're saying is that we're a defeated people, we're rewarding people who are not capable, even thieves. Yeah. We're rewarding thieves. So do you think that this president has the potential to make a change? But of course, it's not a one-man job, it's not a one-man thing. It's all the president's men as well. Has he got the right people around him, or is it still very problematic?
No, it's problematic. I think the president, in the 2 years that we've seen, has had all the opportunities. I mean, he had ratings of support of high 60s, low 70s at one stage. It's going into the low 60s now. And the question is, as a student of politics, are we seeing the closing of an opportunity? And once it's gone, it's gone. Or are we seeing something playing out that we're not following? The question is, we're not seeing results. We're not seeing the kind of results that are convincing people. And it's not just domestic. This is a perception that is around South Africa also. And people lose a sense of purpose and ask, how serious are we? How serious are our leaders? So he's in a very difficult position. We all know that. He's not in the ANC in the traditional sense that you have massive support behind you as a leader. There isn't that support. The question is strategically, do you build your support in the party while you act strongly in government, or do you lose the battle on both fronts? The question, of course, is in the end, who's going to lose most? South Africa, the party, where
the individual,
are you looking at? And that, I think, is also confusing people, because what you hear and what you see are not in any way related. There's a big disjuncture between, we're going to do that, we're going to tackle corruption. It's happening, but not in a way that people are expecting it, and not in a way that is convincing, because we know what's happening now. The Zondo Commission is not a court.
Yes.
It's not.
There's no
it's an
enforcement.
investigation.
Yes.
And yes, you have to get the facts on the table, and yes, you have to find the evidence and prepare proper cases before you go to court. My fear is that we are waiting for the Zondo Commission to finish and then start the other process, because we're not seeing a parallel process. And that is actually what should happen.
But then that's the problem. It's not only in the Zondo Commission then, that this parallel process, which comes back to the first segment where you said that, yes, we don't ignore the past, but we work towards the future. There should be a parallel process working together. We're not doing that. No. We're just looking backwards and we're expecting to walk forwards, isn't it?
Well, that's the problem. And that comes down to priorities and also a sense of reality. What is it that we want? And I think it's time that South Africans start asking the question, what kind of South Africa do I want to live in? A peaceful and prosperous South Africa, or a narrow-minded, homogeneous, monolithic entity where we keep on excluding? We've seen what happens in countries that go that way. To some extent, that's where we come from. Depending on your definition of the past, that's where we come from. So we really have to start thinking seriously and engage each other. What is it that I want to have around me? Do I want an effective state? Do I want effective local governance? Or do I want something that appeals to me emotionally, regardless of how bad it's going to go? We haven't asked those hard questions, and we're not answering them.
You spoke recently about the consequences of our politics, and what do you see that as?
Well, what we see is, and this is not uniquely South African, if we look at the research that's being done across the world in democratic states, we see processes of exclusion, of elite politics that are growing to the extent that there's this gap between people and elites. We see decision-making processes that are taking place behind closed doors. Even between politicians and committees and
advocacy
experts.
Groups,
advocacy groups, but even narrower than that. But people are excluded. People are not part of the process, and they don't see the results. So it's a process that plays out in other democratic systems, but it's becoming especially powerful in South Africa. And we really need to rethink our level of engagement, and how and what and when, in terms of what is it that we want. The politics, the consequences of our politics, to a large extent, what we see playing in South Africa now is a result of what we as a collective allowed in South Africa, what our political elites engaged in and allowed in South Africa, and not over the last 5 years.
No, of course.
Over the last 10 years, even over the last 20 years. The politics of division, of exclusion, of resentment, of hopelessness, of defeat. We created that to a large extent.
And we tolerated patronage and corruption and whatever.
Not necessarily by design. Most people won't go out and say, that's what I want to achieve. But the politics that we played and the politics that we allowed in South Africa have brought us to where we are. And that's the issue. Perpetrators of injustice have not faced consequences. The citizens are facing the consequences of exceptionally poor governance, of exceptionally poor levels of support. And that's a long-term project to turn that around. It's not going to happen quickly. It's not going to be easy.
We look at South Africa then in terms of a global player and our foreign policy and also the attitude of other states. How do you place South Africa?
Again, we have allowed our standing and the perceptions of South Africa to be eroded to the point of insignificance. We love as South Africans to talk about ourselves as
South African exceptionalism,
yes,
almost like American exceptionalism. Yeah.
And especially in foreign policy, we are the gateway to Africa. I mean, that's utter nonsense.
We haven't even recognized Africa. Yeah,
Well,
we don't even welcome them.
And also, is that what Africa wants us to do? Think back. I mean, we were, no matter what you think about the institutions, but South Africa was becoming an institutionalized part of the group of 7, the group of 8, the G8. And then suddenly the invitation stopped. We're not there. And one can go through example after example where South Africa started being ignored, not featured. It's going to be very difficult to get back to that role of influence. And then we say we want to fly the flag for Africa, not only for ourselves. But we can't even maintain it for ourselves. So we've lost, also externally, we've lost a lot in the last 10, 15 years or so, because especially in the foreign policy environment, this goes back 10 years, where we were with President Mbeki, who was a foreign policy president, there's no comparison to what happened to us. Yeah, also, we started marginalizing ourselves through, I think, taking decisions that was not in line with our interests and our values in foreign policy, and also too closely starting to associate with 1 or 2 specific countries. South Africa should not do that. We cannot afford to do that. It's not good for us. We have to be much more circumspect. And we had choices. We could associate with anyone. The problem is we started narrowing our own circle of friends to the point where we became a hanger-on, in a sense, instead of one of the countries that were influencing decisions, to some extent influencing the norms that were developing. That's gone.
Yeah, but South Africa has that potential and we're squandering the opportunity. Do you see a vision in terms of the new leadership?
I'm very careful to link a vision. What I do see, and maybe this is the proper way to start, is a sense of pragmatism. And I think, unfortunately, we are relegated to a pragmatic foreign policy at this stage. We have to rebuild, we have to recalibrate, and we have to recommit. And this is important. Not what others are doing. We as South Africa have to recommit to the values that provide the basis for that vision. So yes, the potential is there. I see some pragmatism that is starting to inform decision making, but that's not the vision. The vision is something that would have to follow in the longer term.
Okay, so we're right at the end. As a parting message, what would you like to leave the audience? Which message would you like to leave them with and ask them to ponder on?
There are many people in South Africa who are endowed with ability, with resources, be it financial resources, be it training, be it good education. I think what we must decide individually, and then hopefully it would have a collective effect, is stop waiting on government and start doing. We have to create a different dynamic, and we have to create an energy that hopefully will drag the system along and maybe shake people into a sense of doing. I think government has weakened to the extent that waiting on them is not viable anymore.
It's almost
I'm not speaking of
isn't
the
it?
people who are really desperately poor, and there are many people who have been left behind. And one cannot expect them to do these things, but there are many other people who can. And we should start acting. And it starts with the individual. And I'm not saying reject government and overthrow government, not by any stretch of the imagination. Again, what kind of South Africa do you want to live in? And you start acting in that way and start influencing the people around you. And hopefully that creates a kind of project and energy, a process that can fairly quickly have a significant influence.
And hopefully it'll build a momentum. Yes. It's about harnessing the creative energy of South Africa.
We have to defeat the sense of being defeated. Yes. And we have many examples in our history of that. across the spectrum in South Africa. We have examples of that. And maybe we should go back to that part of our history.
And see how we do it differently. Thank you very much for sharing these thoughts and these ideas with us. And hopefully I will get Roland back in less than 7 years. Fi amanillah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.